So a lot of people ask what qualifications a marine surveyor has, and it's important to be aware that in this country there's a few anomalies going on. A lot of people think we have a time machine, go back and work out what went wrong with the boat. Some of us I think we have X-ray vision. These days we do have a sort of X-ray vision, which is thermal imaging cameras. And some people think we've got a crystal ball to actually work out what went wrong when the boat parked itself in the rock somewhere and the keel came from the bottom and how on earth it went on. So there's a bit of that going on. So here's the bit. So what minimum qualifications do you think a marine surveyor has to do a pre-purchase survey? And as we've got a packed room here today, I'm going to pick on you.
Well, from what I've learned, you don't have to have any qualifications in this country, is that correct?
You're absolutely right. A marine surveyor in the UK practicing does not need any form of qualifications, just needs you as a customer. And that's why it's so important to ensure that when you are looking for a marine surveyor, you choose someone who's actually a member of a professional body. I'm a full member of the YDSA and the SCMS. I've also been a 40-year membership in British Marine in one guise and another. And I'm also a member of the RYA, which is a bit of a strange one, which is because I actually do coding for the MCA through the RYA, SCS and RYA, so you have to be a member. But look for those sort of surveying associations. Surveyors do all sorts of different things. It's a very interesting job if you ever fancy doing it. I get involved with damage reports, I get involved with new builds, steel, wood, GRP, coal moulded, aluminium. So it's a varied job and it's an interesting way to pre-purchase. I don't tend to get involved very much with new boat builds with warranty problems, but at the same time I always recommend it's a good idea to have that handover or pre-inspection just to check there's no glitches. And this is a classic example of something I found in the boat where a galvanised shackle had actually been used in the rigging as a temporary, and everyone forgot about the temporary fix. And they handed the yacht over with that in the rigging. Had the guy gone to sea with a galvanised shackle holding his rig up, he would have lost it, and he lost 30,000 quid worth of rigging. So it's a good thing to have a guy have a quick glance over the boat for you. A lot of surveyors get involved with the Part 1 registration of a vessel, where in the UK the vessel has to be measured. So again, I'm qualified to use a tape measure. There's a couple of little important measurements that you have to do when you're doing a tonnage measurement, but it's also proving the boat exists and also basically ensuring that the documentation is completed through the CA, like the RWA, the YDSA or the SCMS. So that's something else that has to go through to get Part 1 registration. And the great thing with Part 1 registration is it proves you own the boat. And people can get marine mortgages on a boat that's Part 1 registered. And then I'll talk very briefly about MCA coding. There's a lot of delegation of coding authorities to vessels over 24 metres, and that's done through IRMS, ECAL, RYA, SCMS and YDSA, and I'm a member of those three. So that's the sort of thing we do. I've also got involved with new production boats and also stability and incline tests where, for instance, Arthur Mersel did the Dale 40, and I did the incline test for the RCD, and I provide the documentation for that. Good afternoon, thanks for joining us. That's all right. I'm early. I kicked off, the train left a little bit early, sorry. And the surveyors also get involved with expert witness. So there's a lot of things there that marine surveyors do. But at the end of the day, no matter where you start and come into, the only person you really answer to is the judge at the end of the day. Because he's the one that if you've made a mistake or you have a disagreement, he's the one that makes the decision. So it's really important that everything is documented. And before now, I've had to be involved where I've been an expert witness in an issue where someone's bought a boat and I've had to document the problems they've got. And so it's really important it's done clearly. I always say to people, if you can avoid going to court, it's a much better job. But that's where we are. So one of the biggest problems with a pre-purchase survey that I tend to find is people when selling boats, especially if they're not through a broker, is they don't understand how clear the boat needs to be of not junk. And so if you turn up to buy a boat and it looks like that, personally I would step off it and not bother, because there's no way that I'm going to be able to even go through the boat and look in the inside, to look in the lockers, look in everything else, because it's just full of clutter. Yeah? So it's just a non-starter. So when you have a boat, you obviously have to have it out of the water. You will not believe how many people ask me, can I do a survey with the boat still in the water? And unfortunately, I'm not very good at using my equipment underwater and using my hammer and stuff. So I tend to say, yes, the boat has to come out of the water. It needs to be out of the water for at least a minimum of an hour, 2 hours at least. It really should be washed off so you can actually see the defects. And quite often you'll sometimes, when the boat's being washed off, see blisters on the outside. And people get really worried. And then 9 times out of 10, the blisters on a modern boat are not osmosis. They are water blisters that are between the coatings because people haven't put the coatings on properly, or they've epoxied the boat and it hasn't been dry enough and the boat's permeated from the inside. So don't always start panicking when you see blisters. It's only when you start removing the coatings that you then start to find deep blisters that go wrong. And the problem with blisters is the fact that it's the glycol that's squeezing out of this stuff and pushing the gel coat off. And then you get what's called wicking, which is where these filaments are basically just sucked up like little straws, all the water. And that's the real problem, because this stuff is stuck together as it is here before it's laminated with PVA. So you've immediately got, and it's melting beautifully in it, so you've immediately got, you're putting things into the boat that really shouldn't be there, which is PVA. Then you're laminating it, and then you start getting moisture in it, and then this is where it all goes wrong. Interesting enough, same material, fiberglass, but woven. And when this is laid in large sheets, there's very few straw ends, which is why a lot of the modern production boats these days don't get osmosis like the old boats used to, because they haven't got the end filaments to suck up the moisture. They still suffer with moisture content, but not in the same way as the chop strand. So that's a good one. Now here's a little video, it's on my YouTube. I have left a couple of business cards around, and you'll find there's a link to my YouTube where you'll be able to see these things. But this is one I recently posted, where the boat came out of the water, it was washed off, and the blisters are over 2.5 inches in diameter. And the one I get my knife out and pop, this one here, was nearly 5.5 inches in diameter. And the delamination was about 3 or 4 layers in on a 6 laminar hull. So it's halfway through the boat. And this is why we say to people that there is a point in time where osmosis is going to leave the boat. You've all heard the one of no boat is sunk from osmosis. Well, they're wrong, because I know of at least 3 boats that have actually failed and have actually sunk because the laminate has literally got to that point. So it's really important. The worst bit is, and you probably might see this in the camera angle, but the boat was so wet that when it was lifted out of the water, it actually hogged over the straps. You know, it was that soggy. And I've got loads of demonstrations on my YouTube of what the problems are with soggy dozzy boats, you know, of keel softening up and stuff like that. And towards the end of this, you'll be able to see it as well. You can actually see how the boat is slumped over the spots. And another issue we have is when people have parked boats on stuff. I hear this. So when a boat gets parked on rocks and the keel gets forced up, you get what's called delamination. So what you have is, don't be alarmed when the surveyor gets a hammer out. So he uses a plastic hammer, get rid of them, give me another hammer, it won't damage the gel coat. When a boat comes out the mould, the first thing I did as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old was go over with a ball peen hammer. Quite often we put a bit of tape on the end just to protect it. But it will not mark the gel coat, no matter how hard you hit it, you won't chip it. If it's properly done, it will be fine. So people get quite touchy that way, but a surveyor, when he's using it, he's not hitting it hard, he should be just slightly tapping it like this. And from that lightly tapping, you can hear how the laminate noise is changing. Immediately I know there's a problem. This is good, and that's bad. And I found this in a power boat that hit a channel mark, and it affects the laminate like that, and in doing so, it actually delaminated it. And before we even cut this out of the boat, that's what I found just purely by hammer. And that's what happens when laminate gets overloaded. And the same on the keel. When the keel is pushed up into the boat, it does that, yeah, which flexes all the laminate, and the energy's going to go somewhere and start detaching stuff. So either you have your matrix break out or your laminate starts doing this. And quite often with the back of the keel, that's a very common area that the delamination will happen. So when the boat comes out of the water, most surveyors will start looking around the back of the keel and stuff. My son at 7, Tyler, came with me when this boat had actually broken adrift. a charter boat in Milton Haven and ended up in the rocks. And it pounded for about 2.5 hours. And I gave him someone a lump of chalk, 7 years old, and a hammer. And I said, just tap everything you don't think's right. And basically half the boat was marked up. And when he stood back, he said, that boat's had it, you know. It's now sitting up in North Wales as a holiday home. But this is where it comes back to the importance of access inside. As you can you see all the fracturing inside the boat here? That's where we took the water tank out and we saw all the damage inside where the laminate's flexed and moved. But again, you can see how the laminate here is actually just ripped apart and torn away from the matrix because of the overloading of it. And again, a lot of boats have an internal hull pan which is laid down and glassed in or pasted in. That often comes out. I've seen companies actually pushing filler paste back in to hide it, you know, or painting the bilges just to hide it so they think us surveyors are blind as a bat. I'm not really, but people think so. And again, the telltale fracture lines all over the gel coat. That was a bit more obvious, but again, it was behind a water tank. And the guy had been sailing it off Land's End, the boat had panted, in other words, flexed in heavy weather. And he said it just didn't sound right. He could hear all this creaking. And when we took the water tank out, you can see how all that woven is actually just separated and fractured off. And behind it, you can see what's called balsa core, which is the other problem that we have, which is this old stuff that gets chucked into boats. It's a great lightweight way of stiffening up a boat, but it has to be properly fitted and padded in. The downside is when people drill holes through it, like they did in this case. This one was used to drill a hole for a gas locker, but I've seen it for skin fittings and discharges where they haven't sealed it off properly, and then this stuff absorbs water beautifully. And I also have owners who do this on decks where they've actually fitted something nice and simple like a clam cleat by the cockpit. Yeah, great, except they didn't seal it. What you should have done was taken out the inside bit, put a ply pad in, glassed it in, and sealed it. They didn't. So this whole section of balsa core over about 15 years has gone completely rotten. And that's why when you're buying an older boat, it's really important to walk around the decks and just see if they start to scream. Because it's a golden telltale that there's a problem with the decks. Very regularly, I write for the yachting magazines and advice on sealing the decks and pre-purchases. And one of the things I said to people, look carefully at the decks, because often there'll be teak on the top of this, and if you start seeing water squirting out, if you've got teak on top of this balsa core, which will be screwed through, yeah, can you imagine all those screws into this balsa core? And the sealing of the balsa and the teak is not there. And classic tricks on the YouTube, let the deck down, put a bucket of water, and then start walking around on it, or using a hammer, and you start tapping it, you see the water shooting out, you know you've got a problem. And just to give you an example, I just had a 45-foot GRP yacht with a teak deck. To replace the teak was 30,000, but to replace this was another 25,000, and the boat was only worth 25,000. So it's a bit of a problem. So here's a classic example of what happens to laminate when it gets soft. I don't know if the volume's up on this one, is it? Battery might be my expert. So
13 years old.
13-year-old boat this is. This area here, can you see the blisters on the side there? A bit of a telltale. Again on my YouTube.
Whole hull is stretching off.
I grab hold of the shaft.
For the propeller shaft.
Can you hear that squeaky noise? That's the hull. As I'm pushing it up and down, the whole hull is softened up from just high moisture, because what they did was they used a piece of foam, squirty foam in there to basically seal the shaft in, and it absorbed moisture, and then the whole laminate was gone soft in 13 years. Yeah. So this is the reason why you need to think about this. Bits and pieces I say about with boats is repairs and damage. And it's a great opportunity for me as a surveyor to see how a boat is built. This is an actually exceptionally well built boat. It hit a channel mark over 12 knots, a steel channel mark in the Bristol Channel, which is like 15, 20 feet high. So it hit something that's about 5.5 tons in weight at 12 knots. And that's all the damage it did. And we were absolutely blown away at how much damage it had. But when we actually cut the boat up, one of the things we found was the builder had actually put Kevlar, which is this grey stuff, can leaf stuff, in the build of bow. So what is Kevlar? It's what they use in bulletproof jackets, isn't it? It's a shock absorber. And what a brilliant thing. The downside of Kevlar is it absorbs moisture like cotton wool. It doesn't like laminate. But the most extraordinary thing was when you cut this off, you could actually smell the pre-cure. But again, it's a really good insight into what's inside your boat. You can see the bolts of Corrosion and everything else which will be let you have. But again, as a surveyor, the first thing I did is these white chalk marks and me chalking up where the delamination is. So you can hear that's good, yeah? And you can see it on a real boat, yeah? And that's what I do for a living, is tap things. We're all tappers and shunters clubs. So have a little look at that. You'll see the bolts of core inside. You're welcome to that. No responsibility getting your strands and stuff in your fingers. But just to show you the impact size of it, look at the size of that hole. And we couldn't believe the boat didn't sink. But all that Kevlar and all that laminate, that woven movings, actually held together, and the guys were able to sail the boat back without losing it. What a great idea for building a boat. You can see the shattering of it. Can you see it? Absolutely incredible. So that's that. Another thing that a lot of people forget, and they don't look at, and this is becoming more and more common with the way we build boats, is the hull moulding, which is this side, has a return shelf, as you can see, and then the deck is put down on top to make a nice flange. And quite often they're put together with self-cupping screws and a bit of glue. Great, except we also have the problem that these fittings here are for the bow roller. Now on the yacht, the bow roller is also your stem fitting for all your forestay. Can you see the split that's developing here? Yeah, because there's no reinforcement in the stem. And that's on a standard production boat. Because one side of the building company can't talk to the other side about the fact the stem cap hasn't got a strap on it to bolt to the hull. And there are loads of these boats out there with bow rollers like that with no strap down the front. And I see that on a regular basis. And if, again, on my YouTube, I don't want to keep plugging it, but on my YouTube, the Surveyor's Notebook, by the way, it's a really good title. I grabbed hold of the bow roller, did that, and the guy went, "Stop doing that." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "The master's rocking back and forwards." I was like, "Okay, let's stop doing that." So they had to wait to find out. But that split was developing, and it's quite a common find. And again, access, we come back to access. Sticking water tanks in boats, great. But it's only when you look inside, with the boat being damaged, with the keels, we found all the delamination going on. You know? And there's my favourite son. Southerly 105, great little boat. But just watch the keel panel agents. Again, I've got some stuff on YouTube. People don't realise those keel pads have been taken off every 10 years. This particular boat had a bit of a pounding, the guy had a leak, and thought it was a keel bolt. It was only when I started scraping back all the empty panel, we actually found there was a fracture in the corner. And I found that now on 3 or 4 boats where the loadings where they're pounded on hard sand. So there's little things like that. And again, repurchase. It's amazing how many times I go and see a wooden boat, and the guy has painted everything out. And I think it's because my old dad was such a suspicious man. He used to say, don't buy, when you used to go buy cars, take a magnet with you to make sure there's no filler in the seals and stuff, the minis and all the old cars, they used to fall apart, didn't they? And the same with wooden boats. Beware of the man who's just painted their wooden boat because he's hiding something. It's amazing how many people can hide blocks with a bit of paint. And again, on my YouTube, I've got some great ones, but this boat was a La Rochelle fishing boat, not particularly well built. These frames are terrible. And then he left these ones here, and I said, why have you left those like that? Oh, so you can see which ones I've repaired. I said, what about the other ones? He said, oh, they're all fine. So I got my hammer out, and the first one I tapped, I literally knocked half the timber off. And his face was like, oh. And it's all caused by tanatic acid, where basically it's oak on oak with iron fittings. And oak on oak with iron fittings is incredible. This is a 5-year-old keel bolt out of an East Anglian yacht, where the tanatic acid, the oak, has eaten the iron. So have a look at that, because that's a really cool reaction there going on. I've then got, where are we up to? Keel bolts. You will not believe how many times you go to a pre-purchase survey and one of the selling attractions is the car here, just load up the bench, says new keel bolts. Great, new keel bolts. What he didn't tell you was to fit the last 2 keel bolts in the back here, he actually cut the frame out so he could access them and then blast it back in. So then this whole bilge keel has no support. So when the boat's up in the air, I always waggle keels. It's just something I've gotten into the habit of doing, is lift the boat up and let's see how they're well attached. And yes, he was right, the keel was beautifully attached, but the laminate was actually rocking backwards and forwards because there was nothing holding it. Yeah? And again, I've had times where the engine mounts and the engine beds are not actually glassed into the hull. So the guy's driving on with a 30 horsepower engine in, which is actually sliding up and down inside the glassing because it's separated. There's another one of the boats smiling, yeah, with the keel extended to it. And then this is another classic problem with sugar scoops on yachts. In this particular case, we've got an aluminium stop. And when I opened up the little inspection hatch from the aft cabin bunk and looked inside, this area was full of water. And it's like, well, that shouldn't be there. And what it was right up here, those tiny little screws there for the baling platform fold down ladder are tiny. And people don't think of that loose fastening causing a problem. But those little 4 screws over a period of time have let water into that area. It's completely sealed off because it's got a frame in it, and it's filled up with water. Unfortunately, the French boat builder in question used genuine French stainless steel and has caused a reaction between the aluminium and the iron clips they use, which weren't stainless steel by a long way, and it's actually created a hole in the rudder stop, the aluminium rudder stop, where it's just eating it, and the electrical reaction between the two. So it's little finds like that, but it's all down to keep looking at stuff, keep looking at it and being inquisitive. And I say to you, if you're interested in being a surveyor, the first thing you need to do is be inquisitive. This one always makes me smile. This is on a narrowboat where the guy had a problem with his engine overheating, so he went to Rick's and bought a radiator and fitted it. I throw that one in because it's just you can't believe how stupid people can be. Here's another one where they basically, I don't think they can afford the clips for the fuel line, so they just laid it over the top of the exhaust for the diesel heater. Yeah, I'm glad looking back at that, so the mindset in some of this is unbelievable. And again, simple things like service and maintenance of fuel lines. Check your fuel lines. Have a look and see where they run. You wouldn't believe how often I find a fuel line is laying on a gearbox and the gearbox is rubbing with a sharp edge of fuel line. You'll find your way of getting home. Another one I regularly find is the clips or the connection of the gear shift to the gearbox doesn't have a lock nut on. And I did a narrowboat some years ago where it did £32,000 for the lock gate because the guy thought he was in neutral when in fact the boat was going ahead. And frantically put the boat in reverse, gave it lots of rally, but the boat was still forward, and then he accelerated the 20 tons of narrowboat into the lock gate and split them. So little things like that can do damage. I've been to marinas where people have had linkage problems and have hit 5 boats before they thought about turning the engine off. You know, so little things like that. A diesel bug. This has been an ongoing problem. 35 years ago we never talked about diesel bug, but since we got plant life now used in our field, bio, this is 2 years old and you can actually see some quite large lumps of black growing in this now. And it's all down to fuel management. And I've written loads of articles in PDO and Lost Monthly where I've warned people about the bio. And it's all down to husbandry. So the first thing is the fuel cap filler. Make sure it's one that has a cap that covers the filler point, rather than one of these that has a recess. Because every time you have the one with the recess, you open it, the first thing you do is drop some water down in there. Make sure the O-rings are right. Make sure it's well greased up, you know, with the silicone grease, you know. And then you've got the things like the breather pipe. Make sure the breather pipe is actually turned with a swan neck so it's not sucking water in. Make sure it's in a place where it's well shielded. Fit a desiccant filter if you can. And then you've got the actual tank itself. Make sure you can regularly drain off fuel from the bottom. And check your fuel filters. You know, it's really important. And then you've got people like this one where he fitted a diesel heater but he had no pickup left on the matrix on top of the tank. So he drilled a hole in his breather pipe and stuffed the hose down there. Well, it worked. Unfortunately, every time he filled the fuel tank up, what he was doing, he was actually pouring diesel out of the hose. So into the bilges. And we've got to be more responsible about our environment. And we've got to stop discharging oils and contaminants into the water. And this is a classic example of him just completely blatantly ignoring it. We'd be far better off putting a T into something. But really and truly, diesel heaters should have a separate feed where you can't drain the tank down to no more than a quarter of the tank fuel. It's really important because if not, you can drain your fuel tank and there's nowhere to go home. So engines and running gear, this is more for guys with power boats. But I will talk about the humble engine mount. None of us really appreciate the importance of an engine mount. This is a reasonably sized one, and everyone forgets that when you put an engine in gear, all the energy to push that boat forward is transferred through this fastening. Yeah? This is bolted to your hull, this is bolted to your engine. So when you put your engine ahead or stern, all that transmission is through a set of other mounts. It may be 2 other mounts, it may be 3 if you've got sail guide. But people don't think about looking at these, and quite often I go to survey saying, how are your engine mounts? They say, well, we've never changed them. And sometimes you can find them 20, 30 years old. You know, and then people wonder why. I regularly say to people, get a ply bar, put a little ply bar in there and just see what happens, because quite often these soften up. But in this case, I did put a ply bar underneath and thought there's a bit of movement going on with the vulcanisation here. And so I tried the other end and it did the same, so I thought, this is not right. So I made myself unpopular and said that, you know, I think before we go much further for a sea trial, we need to see these checked, which is quite a job because you've got to lift the engine to have them out. So we postponed the sea trial, and then the next morning the engineer phoned me to say that he'd actually found a problem with it, which is the fact that vulcanisation had actually popped apart. So that engine was sitting on there with actually no anchorage at all. Yeah? Quite remarkable. Great little find. I'm always chuffed when I find little finds that defy the ability. Propellers, I went to Italy and noticed that when I tapped the propeller, not this one is over 2.5 foot diameter. This is a little one. But when I tap the propeller with my hammer, the same hammer I use for fiberglass, I noticed there's a bit of that dull sound to it. Not a nice ring at all. And I thought, this is strange, this is only 5 years old. So I said to the guys, you've got a cathodic problem here. I got my ohms meter out, and ohms is quite easy, nothing to do with Dr. Watson or anything, but you literally stick it on ohms up the top there, and you try and put the connection through to try and get the minimum of 0.2 between the anode and what you're trying to protect. It's dead simple, it's not rocket science, even I can do it. So anyone can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And I couldn't get a signal at all. And I started looking around and I noticed that the anodes from the Italians had actually been painted with anti-fab. So that didn't help. Then I looked inside the P bracket and discovered that the P bracket had actually got all the earthing points brought to the fastenings. And it wouldn't have been a big problem, but the fastenings, when I tapped them with my little 2-ounce hammer, the heads fell off. This is only 5 years old, swinging a 2-foot blade. When I tapped the next one, and that fell off. And you can see the size of that nut, there's my finger, so you can see the size of that fastening from my finger to the not's there. It's twice the size, it's nearly 1 inch diameter. And 2 of the heads fell off. At that point, the Italians told me to stop using my hammer, because they were getting a little bit twitchy. But basically, the fastenings had volunteered themselves because they were a lower denomination than the P bracket and the propeller, and had offered to protect everything because the anodes had been shut off. And this is something we find in Seacocks. You will not believe how often people have bonded Seacocks. In the old days, when I first apprenticed, we were always told to bond Seacocks because they were bonds. These days, the last thing you need to do in your life is bond a Seacock, and we'll come on to that in a minute. So another thing we tend to find is hoses. It's amazing. 20 years ago, the quality of hose, well, I've seen hoses on some yachts and twisters that are 40 years old, and these horse hoses like you. Some of the new hoses, I don't know what's going on with them, but it's the fact that things are made from minimum standards or what, I don't know. But again, splits and hoses where things are not supported properly. And again, when you're looking at an engine, it's amazing how many times you turn up and find someone who's just painted the engine before it's surveyed. Yeah? I don't know what it is, but everyone gets this urge to suddenly make the engine painted before the surveyor turns up. And they immediately point out, we have a new alternator. Yes, you have a new alternator. I can see a new alternator. But I'm a bit more concerned about this corrosion down here. This one, I've got a new alternator. And it doesn't take much to use a camera on a phone these days to be your own surveyor. And start, before you employ me or anyone else, of actually going around. Take photographs of the fuel bowls and think, gosh, there's a lot of contamination in there, and you clearly don't use that boat much. Have a look around the back. Is that the state of the engine mounts and feet? Look at them. Look how that's all compressed into corrosion. Then you start looking and seeing there's water jacket leaks and stuff like that. So you know there's a bit more going on to this engine than the fresh paint. And then you look around the back, and that is the block. If I'd hit that with a hammer, I would have got my hammer through the block. That engine is a write-off. So from what looked like a nice little engine presented to you, you've suddenly gone from a new alternator, fantastic, round to a write-off. And watch out for these things, the engine manifolds. Cast iron manifolds, they're notorious for fracturing in about 10 years old, because believe it or not, iron is porous. And I quite often get, why have you wrapped a piece of bandage around it? Oh, well, there's a grip somewhere. So I used to have a grip. Yeah, but that probably is caused by the big crack in the side and the 2 holes that I can see. It wasn't a grip. This doesn't look much, but that's £800. So something that boat you're buying 20,000, you've already got £4,500 worth of problems in just literally the first bit. And I wish people would look more closely before they employ a surveyor at these sort of things. And this is why I'm here, to try and impart that knowledge. And that's why I've done my Facebook and my YouTube, to try and dispense as much knowledge and why I write for magazines, because I'm trying to help you guys before you spend £800 on me or anyone else. Again, sail drives. I see it all the time online about sail drives. When should the O-ring be changed? The simple answer is, what does the manufacturer say? Well, some manufacturers say 5 years, some say 7. And I quite regularly get, well, we took it out and it was perfect. Great, but at least you've done it. You know, the bit of rubber is only a couple £100. You're probably into, if you have to pay a professional to do it, you're probably into £1,000. If your boat is worth £30,000, £40,000, is that really that big of a deal to know it's right? You know? This is a great one. The guy obviously didn't want to pay any money for 2 of the Jubilee clips. He used some lovely stainless steel ones on this side. And I think he tied this bit of silver foil around as a memoir, to go and buy some more clips, but he forgot, put the boat in the water, and the boat started sinking, because basically this is the more water feed into the gearbox coolant before it goes to the engine, and he hadn't put a clip on it. And that's below the waterline. I think that one also had the bilge pump, where the actual bilge pump wasn't actually connected off the hose. So the bilge pump was whizzing out, there was no hose to discharge it in. So lots of little items we've written over all sorts of things over the 15, 20 years I've been doing this. Here's another classic one, boat cutters. You would not believe how many people fit a boat cutter. Great, but have you thought how you fit the boat cutter? Because in this case, the guy fitted the boat cutter and starved the main bearing in the P bracket. So this P bracket was being starved with water because he put this up so tight the water can't flow through. Which means you mount the bearing in there and then you start getting vibrations. So which is better, the boat cutter? What we should have done was perhaps thought about, put that in, great. That's too close. Have I got an R&D coupling? No, I haven't. Oh, I'll stick an R&D coupling in and move that blade away. There is a little bit of an important thing on shafts, which is basically, if you've got like this a 30mm shaft, you should never have more than 1.5 times the diameter from the bearing to the back of the blood to the boss. So you've also got to take that one into consideration as well. But fitting a little R&D or spacer in the coupling would be a great way of solving that problem and saving yourself a lot of grief. I'll come off this now in a second. Here's another classic one. This is a flexi coupling which someone decided to use mild steel clamps on and was lucky not to sink the boat. And the best bit is these two here, as you tighten them up, it actually squeezed the actual fitting he was trying to secure out of the end. Again, no clamps because they've all fallen off. And here's another engine mount. Again, oil leaks. When you start getting oil leaks and fuel leaks, if you haven't got shields over your engine mounts, the rubber breaks down so quickly. And again, regular checks. And it is important, you know. This is a classic one I found in the Nicholson 36, where the guy had clearly not done much maintenance. and in doing so, just watch the actual shaft coupling, the stern tube here, is actually loose from the fact that everything else is flying around in the ring. So, give it a kick, there we are. So if this is on the YouTube, see all the bearing and the boss all loose? You see how I waggled out, the whole stern tube's loose, because that has been running for so long that it's actually loosened up the glass through the tube. And he was wondering where it was leaking from, and it's like, well, it's like a sieve. There's so many different places it's leaking from, I don't know where to start. So we're on to Seacock. Before I do Seacocks, this piece of stainless steel was only in a boat for 5 years. And what actually happened was the owner decided to change the propeller from the one that's supplied by the manufacturer. And what he didn't get right was the taper. So when he fitted his preferred propeller, he didn't get the taper right on the keyway here. And in doing so, he starved water, trapped water in here, which couldn't replenish. And stainless steel, everyone says, oh yeah, stainless steel's great underwater. You shouldn't use stainless steel underwater for any fastenings, anything where you can't rejuvenate the oxygen. So this is the result. The chromium has gone completely doolally and disappeared. And that's 5 years. If you want to get rid of stainless steel, starve the oxygen, wrap some masking tape around, leave it in the water, and you can cut it in half in under 5 years. It's really amazing. No energy at all. So I'm very well known for my rant on Seacock, so without further ado or disappointment, here's my rant on Seacocks. DZR, absolutely hate the stuff. We only started using DZR back in the 80s because the French bean counters decided they could save 150 quid on a boat by getting away from bonds and making everyone use these wonderful DZRs. So have a look at these. These are actually out of real live boats. That's one of the places they waste away. They fail where you can't see them through the hull. This one, the guy said there's nothing wrong with it, and when he used the spanner on it, he actually snapped it off, clean off at the skin fitting. And this one is where the hose came down onto the fitting, and the wall of the fitting you can see here is probably 1.5–2 mil thick, and it just shears straight off. Feel free to come in and have a look at this stuff, guys, because it is all good stuff. And so I actually hate them. The other thing I would say to you is, be very aware there's an awful lot of production boats out there that are supplied where the skin fittings like this on a 1 inch or 3 inches up in the air before the valve. There is, like so many other bits of engineering, it should never be more than 1 to 1.5 times the diameter before the fitting, because after that you'll start to create this massive lever, and then as things tighten off, well, you can see the state of those fittings, they just shear off. So start thinking about using True Design and Marilon and other composites. I really hate the fact some people try and sell them as plastic. They're not, they're a composite fitting. I've got them in my own boat, I've got the Marilons in my boat. 15 years, a little squirt of silicone oil every time the boat comes out of the water. But the most important bit is to use them. Yeah? Don't just fit them and forget them. When you leave the boat, shut your Seacocks off other than your deck boats. Why I go on boats and you find that every fitting is open? It's like, why? It's just like playing Russian roulette, especially through the winter. I have a plethora of skin fittings like this that fail from where they're just close to the waterline and the water is frozen in the marina and it's sheared the fitting. It's great. About 4 days after the thaw comes, you get the phone call to say the boats are sunk. And I've been to one marina where 8 boats sunk on 1 day, all from skin fittings. So just think a little bit about what you're doing. And again, why is it you have this temptation to use mild steel clamps on hoses? Yeah? I just don't get it. But again, you've got the bonding here, and this is an example of what happens to a Seacock when it volunteers itself because the anodes are shut off. And our water qualities are changing. And for instance, I live in South Wales. Our marine at Swansea is now fresh water for nearly 1.5 metres down. So if you're sitting in Swansea Marina, you really need to be using magnesium, but you can't use magnesium when you go to sea. So the advice is to use aluminium and hang a magnesium anode over the side, but do not bond your Seacocks, because the first thing that happens when your anodes shut off is the skin fittings, like the DZR, will volunteer themselves. And it's very kindly volunteered itself. Try not to use zinc at all now. That's my personal advice. And I've noticed that people like MG Duff and that are actually trying to work more people away from zinc onto aluminium. It's cheaper. Woohoo! And it's better. And the other competition I love, apart from here, another one being bonded, is why is it people have this insatiable urge to put as little as the hose on the skin fitting to start with, you know? And it's almost like a competition to see how little hose you can push down onto the skin fitting. If you can't get it on, you're either using the wrong hose or something's not right. You know, boil up that kettle and that, and force them on. The other thing with this is, see how this hose is not supported. And again, when they're not supported, especially this rib type hose will in time split. Okay? If you have Seacocks that you don't use, cut them out, blast them up, get rid of them. The guys at West Epoxy and that have a fantastic way of showing you how to blend off Seacocks and stuff. Thanks guys. So there's that, and this is the reason why, because even though that Seacock there is not being used, can you see the corrosion line around it? It's just a time bomb. The other thing with this is a nice example. Don't forget, if your boat is built with this stuff, and you're fitting a Seacock, we move the bolt support around the area where you're fitting the Seacock, like these guys here have done. Because the moment it starts leaking, I had a Scandinavian boat where someone decided to fit some extra Seacocks for a water maker, and he drilled straight through this stuff, fitted the Seacock, it leaked, and basically he had £15,000 worth of wet bolt support on the bottom of his boat. And he only knew about it when the boat came out of the water and they popped it up and the boat sagged over the supports because there was no strength in the laminate because all the floor was wet. And that's when I got involved again. And it's just like, I just bang my head against the brick wall all the time over just silly things like one hole, one fitting, which the guy spent less than 150 quid. Use a cordial on the inside straight away to relieve that area, blast it up, seal it off, and then make it watertight. So anyway, we covered that. More metal fittings. And here's the Marilons. I love them to bits. Fantastic. And the other ones are True Design. They're all really good stuff. Again, written loads of articles. White plastic fittings above the waterline. Try to get away from using them completely now. Our world has changed in the last 10 years. UV light breaks white plastic now so fast. You're far better off using metal fitting. You know, and I didn't want to say brass or PZR, but that's better than the plastic, the white plastic, because they split and they just break up. Exhaust hose, not even 5 years old, comes back to the quality of some of the stuff we're using now, but it's split when it needs tightly turned and off a bone filter. And again, just keeping that little eye on your maintenance regimes. My talk is titled X-ray vision, and here's a classic example. We turned up, this boat had a heavy grounding, and from tapping the rudder blade, I knew there was a laminate problem. And I could see where it was from the hammer, but I couldn't actually show anything for the insurance company. Get the thermal imaging company out, and there's the white faint line. And that is clear as day on the thermal imaging camera. And you can even see where the rudder stop is running through. It's a bit like being a dentist. You can actually start to see inside the boat's makeup. And believe it or not, I've been to I've done thermal imaging camera before now, where a boat was being painted, and I've actually found all the filler from the hole that was created inside the boat, which you couldn't see. And I said, oh, this boat's been damaged. And they all looked at me as if saying, how do you know? Because the filler is denser than the actual laminate, and it shows on a thermal imaging camera. You know? So it's all good stuff. That didn't need a thermal imaging camera. That's what happens inside your rudder blades. And again, we come back to this crevice corrosion of the fact that when they're filled with foam and you use stainless steel, you will start to get crevice corrosion, which is why a lot of surveyors like myself, if you've got a soggy rudder blade, we will insist on splitting them open and getting rid of them. Okay? If you've got aluminium, again, great, but just be very aware that I've had a lot of problems with aluminium rudder stops where you get electric issues, and just look carefully around the tops to see if you see any pitting. Again, getting loads of nonsense about it all. Here's the one split open. This one here's on the Bandstat, where it was split open. You actually see the core and how all the tangs fit. And quite regularly, once this gets soggy, those tangs will separate inside because they'll be exactly the same as that crevice corrosion there. So that, I hope, gives you a bit of an insight into the job. Very quickly, I'll just touch on keels, and then I'll just talk very quickly about carbon monoxide. So keels, I've actually literally, I've been at the show head going look at one boat this week, which was a lead keel, parts itself on the rock, and lead is great because it's like having a shock absorber. So what happens is the lead tends to bend rather than the hull. What you have to watch is the fact that sometimes some people have this urge to hide that sort of damage. And in this case, the guy literally beats the builder's merchant, bought himself a bit of lead, copied the profile of it, whacked it in the top with some Sikaflex, did another Sikaflex round, and hey presto, no damage keel. Unfortunately, I looked at it and thought, that's a bit strange how thick that Sikaflex is, and started having a little poke around, pulled the Sikaflex off, and it's like, oh, you've had a bit of grounding. And it's another reason why surveyors will quite regularly remove the anti-foul fore and aft on a keel to look at the stress points where boats hit stuff. This one again was a good attempt to try and hide a 20mm bend in the lead from the grounding. And again, it's just stupid. If you're insured and you ground your boat and you do that sort of damage, just ring the insurance company, because that's what you pay the insurance for. You know? Iron is a different ballgame. When iron parks itself on the ground, it comes up at quite a speed. I've actually had a boat before now, I had a 40-foot yacht that parked itself on a sandbank, and it hit the ground so hard, the guy in the binnacle actually disappeared down to the companionway and had to cut out the ship's wheel because it actually folded round him as he went down to the companionway. And the keel came up through the matrix quite spectacularly. And if you look on my YouTube, you'll see a Grand Soleil out in Corfu I had to go out to have a look at. Ironically, that was a lead keel, but geez, he really hit rocks hard because he actually pushed the keel in through the hull. But it's quite common to see all this fracture lining and delamination, as I've talked about with tapping it. And we've got keel bolts, again, here's a genuine bit of French stainless steel. You're very welcome to have a look at that. That's French stainless steel. That came out of a French boat which clearly stated it has stainless steel. This is what I call English stainless steel. This is the difference. 30 years old and still comes out nice and shiny. And again, if you know your boat's had a grounding, don't get tempted to reuse the keel bolts. For the sake of 200 quid, just put new ones in. And the reason why is the fact that, like this one here, the guys said there's nothing wrong with the keel bolts, but when you actually roll them across the table, you can start seeing straight away there's a problem with them, you know? The other thing is, when you actually cleaned up the threads and took a photograph of it, where they've been leaking for a few years, you've got loads of little pits. And once those pits start, you know that fastening is starting to loosen up. So don't be shy to change the keel bolts. That's the one I showed you earlier. I've written articles about 7 tips to look at what you do when you have grounding. But the most important thing is have the boat out of the water. And if you start seeing weeps like that, it's pretty obvious there's a problem. Look inside at the fastening arrangement. Have you got splits and cracks developing in the framework? That's another clue there's a problem. Just like that one. That one's pretty obvious there was a problem. We actually broke the fracture in the casting. This one had been badly repaired where they created a shoulder inside. And so by creating a shoulder laminate it causes a stress point. And when you do that, it fractures, and it unfortunately fractured the matrix inside. And it was a really bad repair because they actually tried to flow coat the cracks around the keel bolts to try and hide it before the sail. And this is a westerly, and this comes right back to my start of my talk about the fact that when laminate gets so wet, it will fail. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. This is over an inch thick, this laminate, and the owner, I feel really sorry for him because literally the year before, we recovered his keel, and true to his word, he had replaced his keel bolts. Unfortunately, the laminate was so soft that with all that rocking and sailing, it slowly tore the laminate and it actually just fell off. And believe it or not, the boat was actually on its mooring and it fell off on its mooring. That's how we got the keel back to the section of it falling off. The phone call said the boat was sinking, it was leaning over on its side, it was really weird. So that's that, and a bit more genuine French. I'll get through this bit. My main message to you guys is deck fittings, make sure that they're well sealed. This again is a 2-year-old aluminium boat. Didn't seal it, look at the water drips, look at the state of the anchor winch in 2 years. It's just so easy to look at stuff. Again, all on my YouTube. If you're fitting things to the boats, think a little bit about how you fit them and why you're fitting them. This gentleman unfortunately used some genuine marine ply, just like this genuine marine ply, which is not even 3 years old. Yeah, because it's rubbish, that's what people buy. Do not be caught out with genuine marine ply. So that pad was rotten within 2 or 3 years, but more importantly, he connected made up shore power. And apart from the fact that he used the shore power connected to the gas pipe, which is a bit of a no-no, the actual cable for the shore power was laying over the steering wire. So it's slowly been sawing the wire through. So if someone stepped on that boat at some point with a live shore power cable and touched the helm, they'd have probably killed themselves. But he did tell me the wife was insured, so it was alright. Gas, I have an absolute abhorrent hate of gas. On my own boat, I've gone over to a diesel cooker, which has been the best thing I've ever done. I've got rid of gas because I use the boat on there. And this actually happened to me, it's on my YouTube, literally 3 weeks ago. I was sitting in Corfu Yacht Club and I heard a most almighty bang. I thought someone had actually exploded something. And what it was the gas regulator had actually failed. This pressed metal fitting, about 10 years old, had actually, the casting had actually failed. And that was then surging raw high pressure gas out of the camping gas bottle and discharging gas into the cockpit. And because of the wind direction, it actually started filling the cockpit and the cabin with gas when people were on board. So I hopped on board, I whizzed the gas bottle off, chucked it in the water, you'll see it on YouTube, and then I literally jumped down below, switched all the electrics off, and then got the guys to hand pump the bilges and bucket the bilges to get the gas out of the bilge. The good thing was the boat had a gas alarm in it. Brilliant. What a credit to the hire company. What a shame they didn't service their gas. Yeah? And I will leave you with this last one, which is carbon monoxide. I've actually written so many articles about bad diesel heaters and DIY fits. This one, gas pipe is bad enough. But at the other end of the cockpit, the guy actually put the diesel heater in the cockpit. Look at that for an installation. It's in the same locker as the gas bottles have been stowed in. It's filled with polyurethane rope. It's onto a fiberglass surface. Can you see the scorching on the side? Laminate catches fire about 650 degrees, 550 degrees, 650 degrees, something like that, 550 degrees. But absolutely mad. And here is the worst diesel heater system I've seen in a long time. A jerry can, plastic jerry can, with a plastic hose, run around the back, to feed a 1978 BT diesel heater that the guy bought at auction. Stuff. Running on 9 volt, which you might think is great, but the great thing about 9 volt is it will flatten your batteries and you won't even be able to start your engine, which is why the marine ones have all these sensors in them, so that once your batteries get below a certain voltage, they shut off. The same with the installation, that if you're draining your fuel tank, you only go down to like a 42 tank. But more importantly, this exhaust, not shielded at all. The unit is not shielded from the heat at all. There's a Mabel report out there about a fishing boat that caught fire because this was hard against the fiberglass which set fire to the boat. This runs at about 600 degrees, which is just on the flash point of fiberglass. And these, I've done this on YouTube, just about every diesel kit that you buy off the cheap sites, yeah, comes with one of these. It's pitiful. You can literally blow into it, I can hold the finger of the seal here, and I can still blow air from it. So that means when that exhaust is running, you're filling your boat with carbon monoxide. And there are reports from Mavia about people dying from carbon monoxide from these heaters. So please, when you go back to your boats, have a serious think about the diesel heaters and how it's fitted, because it is an absolute killer. And I think that's about where I'm going to finish my talk. So on that sober note, please have a look at my YouTubes. I've got loads of stuff, undersized batteries, batteries that catch fire, wiring that melts, you know, those been laid over the exhaust pipe, undersized wiring that melted to try and start an engine. You know, there's some amazing amount of DIY idiots out there who just don't even think. And this guy actually strapped the battery to the exhaust pipe because he had nowhere else to put a battery. I wondered why it exploded. We've written some very steep cuts since the Stokies. We've got Stokey Woodhall, who's very kindly redoing my talk, but for some reason they managed to get too mixed up. I have no idea why, but I think right at the end here, if I can find it, is a great one. That's the battery. I actually have no idea. There it is. Downthruster cables. You know how loose they are. Think of the voltage that's running through that. and how hot all that gets. That's how fire starting boats. This is a battery that exploded, you know, on a yacht. Just think about it. I had a close escape myself this year. My batteries are 4 years old. I went down below and I said to my wife, I can smell a funny eggy smell. It's really weird. And one of the batteries had a duff cell in it. And so I immediately hoiked it off, shot the engine, hoiked it off, disconnected it and reconnected it for free. So we were down to 330 rather than 440. And the battery was red hot and expanded. It's on my YouTube about it. But again, just be very aware of those sort of things. So anyway, it's great of you. I started with one person and I've ended up with quite a few of you and I really appreciate it. Take my cards, take the flyers, and if I can ever help you, or should I say, if you need a surveyor, please look and employ someone from the association. Don't just take the first number out of the phone book. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we find you